concerns that you might have. There's a reason we don't necessarily train every student on every single emergency protocol that we're going to do. Quite simply, if there ever is an active shooter, it's most likely going to be a student. And you don't want to train your potential suspect pool on every single detail of your emergency response. So we do want to make sure that we walk that fine line of providing enough information to help a student help themselves stay safe, that the faculty knows what to do to help keep that student safe, without either sharing too much information or, more importantly, in my opinion, sharing or creating a sense of fear. I hope we never get to a place that our schools look and feel like a fortress, because at the end of the day, all that really does is sends a message to our students and our faculty that the wolf's at the door. And if we go outside, the wolf's going to get us. And I don't think that's a good environment to try to learn in. It's certainly not something that's an enjoyable thing to live in. And we want to try to be able to strike a chord with what we know we need to do to provide the safest campus as possible without it feeling like a prison, if that makes sense. And so I think tonight's effort was really just about sharing what the school system has done in terms of physical security of our campuses, to share with what our SROs do on a daily basis, much more than just, I think as Greg said, looking good and carrying a gun. Is that right? I've never been accused of that one. But I hope you understand how very fortunate we are in Transylvania County. It's unlike any other place I've ever been. Greg and I have actually been invited on a couple of different occasions to travel to other counties and present to their commissioners or their school boards what we do here. And at least one county I know of has modeled their entire school resource officer program after ours. And I think that's a great honor. I think that's a testimony to everybody in this room, because this is what it takes. I can't do it. These folks can't do it. Dr. McDaris can't do it. It takes all of us to make it work. You as parents and grandparents have to take your part in this. You have to teach your kids, to think, because survival in any situation is about thinking. And we don't ever want to get to a place that we train a bunch of robots that can't think. So we want to make sure that we do that. I do want Greg to talk just a little bit about, Dr. McDaris mentioned those tactical site surveys. I would like Greg just to touch on that just a little bit, because that's one thing I'm confident most people don't realize happens.
And one other thing, before I hand the mic over to Greg, some other things I wanted to share with parents, that we are working very hard to try to refine how we get the word out to you as quickly as possible about what's going on in a particular situation. Understand that there may be some times when things are happening as they unfold, we may not have all the details to give you. But when we lock down the school, we're going to lock it down, and we're going to keep the people inside very safe. And part of that is working with Kevin Smith and others to try to get out our messages. The world's become engrossed in social media, and I realize that. It's not like it used to be. I remember years ago, one time at a school board meeting, we talked about more phones in schools, and I remember Mr. Cathy, Jason, you may remember this, he said, well, we had one phone at Rosman High, and that was good enough. And at that time it was. And it's a different world now. And I can promise you too, I cannot text as fast as your kids can. I cannot, I've tried. And I even have to look down at what I'm texting, they don't. So sometimes when we're sending out a message and preparing that, working with the Sheriff's Department to make you aware of what's going on and to make sure that you understand that your child is safe, you might hear from your child faster than we can get that message out. But just understand, it's not intentional. We're trying to get it together as fast as we can.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Tactical survey. About 10 years ago, we started at the beginning of each school year, or just prior to the start, doing what we refer to as the tactical site survey. That consists of a team of folks coming into the school, that being school administration, SROs. We bring some outside folks in from emergency management, typically our fire marshal, some folks from school maintenance. that are mainly not here every day walking around, a fresh set of eyes, if you will. It's about a 40-page document. We're in and out of every building, every room, in every area of the campus, identifying anything that could potentially either be of danger or something that could be improved for school safety. Each year, what we typically do is once the document is completed, is we'll come up with a list of items. If anything's been identified as something that needs to be addressed, turn that in, and it's very quickly and timely addressed from our school maintenance folks or whoever that's needs to address it. Sometimes it's shrubbery. You know, in the summertime, your shrubbery, like my house, has grown up and it needs some attention. That needs to be cut back from the windows or blocking some lighting around some of the parking lots and things of that nature. It could be logs that have, for whatever reason, are not working at the beginning of the school year. But it's about a 40-page document. It takes quite a bit of time to do it, but it's done each year just prior to school starting. And I want to touch base before I leave that real quick before I hand the mic over. Each year, for the last 6 years or 7 years, I've had the opportunity to take these guys to a national Safe Schools conference. It's one of the biggest in the country. And as these guys said, I sat there for a week hearing about what's going on in much larger systems than ours. And I think it's probably safe to say in areas that probably money's not an issue. And I know when we're talking about our local government, it's what it is. You know, we only have a certain amount of money that we can spend on our schools and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, and at the end of each week, when I sit there and listen to these things, I'm thinking, wow, you know, there's large systems across the country that are trying to do things to make their schools safer, and they're trying to get to the point that we are today. And I always leave there at the end of the week thinking, wow, it's amazing that we're where we are, that these large systems from across the country are trying to catch up to where Transylvania County's at. And it always makes me feel good when I come back here and I realize, you know, we've got this. We're in good shape. You know, I tell parents all the time, I had 3 kids that came through here, and of course, we got one working back in the system now, my daughter, and the son that's in college that hopes to become a teacher. And I feel good about that. You know, I've got a granddaughter that's going to be here in a year or so. Not once do I have any concerns about my children working in our school system, and a granddaughter that's going to be starting here in a year or so, just because I feel good about where we're at. And all that's too, guys, from the commitment from our community and our local government. You know, I know that you know, at the end of the day, sometimes there's some tough decision has to be made, but I'm confident that when it comes to our children, that those decisions, the right decisions, are going to be made to make sure that they're safe.
And I want to add too, you know, I've got a 15-year-old that goes to school here, and my gorgeous daughter right there who's home on spring break from college. I'm a parent that knows what it feels like when you get an emergency alert. Another campus, our college campus, had an active shooter last fall. And there just aren't words to describe how you as a parent feel when you get that message. My wife immediately started texting our daughter. I immediately started calling the sheriff, wanting to know how much bullets I needed to bring down from the campus. I get that, and that's one of the reasons that we want to have this conversation, because there really is no worse feeling in the world than to know your child is somewhere else, and all you want to do is put your arms around them and make sure they're safe, and you get that text that says, "I'm sorry, you can't come here." That's tough. And one thing I do want to throw out there, because it's extremely important. We learned this lesson with every single case that we've studied across our nation. We saw it in Florida, and we even saw it to a degree with this incident I described at Brevard College. We're going to get factual information out as quickly as we can, but you can bank on the fact that it will be factual information. The incident at Brevard College, it turned out to not be an incident at all, a miscommunication between a Mountain Heritage student and her grandmother. And that, don't get me wrong, I appreciate the phone call. I would much rather err on the side of caution and chase that rabbit all around than find out somebody knew something and didn't call us. But there never was a gun involved in that. But a Brevard College student began tweeting that they heard gunshots outside of their dorm room. Well, you can imagine what information that's not based on fact, what kind of negative impact that has. So one thing that I would ask you to do, the worst thing we can possibly do in the event of a lockdown would be for everybody to start rushing to the school, because what we're going to have to do is pull resources out of the school when they should be protecting our children to deal with parents like me that wanted to storm on campus and take care of business. I get that. And so we saw it to some small degree, although we were very fortunate to get that cleared up quickly at Brevard College. If that had gotten on a bigger scale, could have created a sense of panic or maybe some unfortunate circumstances. So along those lines, we're always looking for opportunities, technology or otherwise, to do it better. Although we're very fortunate, I feel like, to have a great model in place, we're never satisfied, just never satisfied. We're always looking for something else. We're always looking for that next step, that next program. We've been talking about some technology that exists. It's they're a little bit proud of it in terms of cost, but we're talking about some technology that exists that if we could make it happen, it could create an opportunity that educators could have a direct line of communication with responding officers. I think everybody would agree that would be awesome, real-time information. But we got to get that worked out in terms of getting them off their prideful price right now. But we're working on that. And I think that's just a great example of what we continue to do. Even though we're both very happy with what we are doing, we're never satisfied with that. We always want to take it to that next level. I don't think you ever produce the best product you can unless you're always looking on how you improve something. And so, although you're going to hear us and you have heard us talk a lot of good things about what we're doing, and I'll stand by every bit of that, I want you to understand that nobody up here is ever going to be satisfied with where we're at. We're always going to look for other opportunities, and that's part of the reason that we're here tonight.
Probably close to time to open up for some questions. Before we go to those questions, I will simply say a reminder to the public, because it's very important to me. I know it's important to the sheriff. I know it's important to our SROs and to our educators in this room. You know, very often when I have a new teacher who comes in, who's fresh out of college, and they're all excited, full of all sorts of new ideas, and I will meet with those new teachers, I'll ask a question, and I'm not trying to trip them up, but sometimes I will unintentionally. I'll ask them, what's their most important thing they're supposed to be doing? And of course, you know, they're fresh out of college, and so many times they'll say, well, to educate children. That is important. That's why we have schools. That's number 3. I want you to understand, that's number 3. First thing that's our role is to protect them. Make sure they're safe. And the second one's to love them. Number 3 is to educate them. And I think if we approach that as a community, the school system, the sheriff's department, we've already won half the battle, quite frankly.
There were a lot of questions turned in, and I'm going to ask anyone in the audience, have you written any questions down that we didn't already collect? If you would pass them down to this aisle, I'll come pick them up. But we have some that I think you all can start handling. How do you plan to make Transylvania County Schools safer? Sheriff Mahoney already started touching on that, but are there things in the works, Dr. McDaris, that from your side that are going to make things better?
Well, as Sheriff Mahoney alluded to, we are looking at some new technology that will increase our ability to correspond in a crisis situation. We also are actually tapping into some of the talents of our teachers. We have an instructor, for example, at Brevard High School doing some pre-engineering things. He has a device that the students can make. It's made out of metal. It's very lightweight. And we're trying it out. It's a prototype modeled after an actual item that you can set into place very quickly at a door, and it just pops into place and it makes the door almost impossible to open. And so we're looking at some of those types of things. We're looking again at You know, if we had more cameras, where could those be strategically placed? The design of our campuses. I mean, we're talking about some things that we want to do to our schools that I know people are aware of, but in that conversation, how does that design make the school campus even safer? Those are all parts of the conversation.
Yeah, I think those are all very important, and as I mentioned earlier, the technology. I'm glad to hear about the door stopper idea, because one of the things that, and this is not a top secret thing, when we go into a lockdown scenario, we talk about safety, and that's one of the most important things that we can do for our students, is keep them safe. And we're going to try our best to get all of those kids inside a safe room. Well, once we get them in that room, that's just half the battle. Keeping a potential bad guy out of the room is the other half. And so that's a great example of one of the things we're trying to work on, is how do we further protect that room, keep that room as safe as possible, and still be able, that's where the technology comes in. If we have a teacher that has a class of 20 students that are secured in that room, well, that's all well and good, but what's even better is that ability for that teacher to be able to communicate with the responding officers and say, here's what's happening outside of my classroom, or here's where I think the suspect may be. So I think those two things in conjunction are a great step in moving to the next level of security.
Before that, what are Transylvania County Schools and the Sheriff's Office, how do they plan to avoid even having an incident like Parkland where someone's in the school?
So I think that's a great question, because that's where we really ought to be. We ought to be at how we prevent that. I'm very comfortable with our ability to respond to that, but nobody wants to respond to that. We want to prevent that. And I think we've described a little bit of what we try to do in a prevention standpoint from the Sheriff's Office. I think that if you look back across the school shooting scenarios over our nation's history, you'll find a couple of things in common. You'll find kids that felt like they were alone. You'll find kids that felt like they had no hope. You'll find kids that had no positive role models. And I think that's a big step in the right direction. I think that's one thing that I know our educators do, I know our SROs do, is taking time to invest in kids. And that's just a benefit of having smaller classrooms. It's a benefit of being here together, investing in kids. Let them know, I don't care what your home life's like, there's somebody here, if no other place. There's somebody here that cares about you. There's somebody here that wants to see you succeed. There's somebody here that's going to come to that ball game or that chorus event or that band concert. There's somebody here that's going to support you in anything you want to try to do. And you give them back hope. You give them back that role model. And you make sure they know they're not alone. And I think that's one of the best things that we can do in terms of prevention. And I think that's something that our system here is set up to do.
You've already spoken to this a little bit, but maybe you could speak to any further on the procedures for responding to different situations on campus. Are there different levels in the way that we would respond? And that's to you, Sheriff. And then Dr. McDaris, is there actually policy in place from the Board of Education for students and staff and how they are supposed to respond? Are there just things that, should people know that there's at least guidance available that for members of the staff?
Well, we do have practices based upon policy in place where the drills that we talked about. We conduct drills and you know, we do not want to miss that opportunity. And sometimes I think you can almost become too desensitized, and we don't want that to happen. I'll give you a perfect example. At another one of our schools, not this one, shall we say, we had a parent that was very concerned and contacted the principals of actually two schools to say, you know, in light of all these shootings, I just asked my child if they did any drills. And teenagers, sometimes being teenagers, said no, I don't recall that. And the principal was able to tell them the dates and the exact time of day that they had to drill. And when they confronted their child, oh yeah, I forgot about that. But that's okay. You know, it's okay from the standpoint, it's not okay for God, but it's okay from the standpoint that once they were reminded of that, they did confirm that we had the drill, but we don't, that's something we're talking about too. We don't want it to become just a routine that they don't take seriously. Every single drill is a serious thing, and we are required to have those. It is our policy and practice, and we will continue to have those, and we're going to continue to refine them. You know, it used to be we would have fire drills, and we would see how fast we could exit the building in an orderly fashion. Well, we've had to, we have to rethink that. Depending, we still want to have fire drills, and we're at that time of the year where, fortunately, not so much in the mountains, but we know that there's bad weather awareness, tornado drills. We dodged a bullet with snow today. I hear they're getting it down in Raleigh and Greensboro, which, by the way, is very healthy for them to get that down. So we don't just do weather preparedness. And we have to realize when we look at what happened in Florida, and why we don't want students to just take a routine take it for granted. That young man knew what students were supposed to do in a fire drill, and he pulled the fire alarm because he knew that students would come out into the hallway. We're having to examine that sort of thing on how we want to react in every single situation. It makes us realize that there are people that are suffering from mental illness, and they are sometimes thinking of things that are quite bad. So it is part of our policy and practice to have these drills, but we also have to realize that there's different situations, and it's a constant discussion on our part on how we can make it safer and better. I wish I could stand before you, and when you leave tonight, I can tell you that I can 100% guarantee that nothing will ever happen. I can tell you that I can 100% guarantee that we're going to try very hard to make sure nothing happens. But there are people in the world that are suffering from some problems, and we've got to be on guard against that.
On the other part of that question, in terms of response, there are various levels of lockdown response depending on what the threat is. So each one gets a little more invasive, if you will, into the school schedule. And so if there's a potential threat but nothing direct, we may go into a more soft lockdown. It may be that there's a little bit more attention paid to where students are, but they're still able to go have lunch and go from one place to another. And it goes all the way up to a complete lockdown where everybody is inside a closed classroom and trying to get kids off of a football field or wherever they may be outside of that. It's an all-out effort to really lock everything down. And so we do evaluate what the risk is, what the information is, what we initially assess the problem to be, whether it's for example, if we were just to have someone that decided they wanted to run from a patrol officer and they take off running right down in front of the school, we may go ahead and notify the school, hey, we've got a guy that's running from us right there. So the school may institute just a lower level of being aware versus whether that guy now all of a sudden decides to try to make entry to the school, well, that steps that up. And then we mentioned that Code Yellow style lockdown where we had a threat, not necessarily a viable threat at that point. It's something we wanted to make sure we were very cautious about. And then, of course, if we have a threat on campus, then we have the ability to lock everything down.
We had several questions that kind of loop around the same issue, which is the number and the location of SRO. So, for instance, have you considered putting a second SRO on campus? What's the current procedure if an SRO has to be off campus? Can you speak to that, Sheriff?
Absolutely. So you've met all of our SROs except for the two that weren't able to make it tonight. They are assigned to their respective schools, and that's their duty station. There are times that the SRO has to be off of campus. Court appearances, some mandated training. They're just like everybody else. Sometimes they get the sniffles and the cold. And so there are those times that they have to be off campus. We have a system in place and have had for a number of years that if one school's SRO has to be away from the campus, we're fortunate that we have some schools that are fairly close to each other. And so we kind of have an automatic protocol for that neighboring SRO, if you will, to kind of split duty there so that there's never a school that has completely unattended. I will say part of our discussion, particularly since the incident in Florida, has revolved around some ideas of how we can train other maybe retired law enforcement officers as a fill-in of sorts, so that we could train them with the retired law enforcement locally, and maybe utilize those folks to fill in for our SROs at times that they are away from vacation or sick or having a court appearance. So we are having some of those discussions in terms of how we fill those holes when they do happen.
As a follow-up, how can citizens, what can they do to ensure that funding for school resource officers and safety improvements, how can citizens work on making that a priority in their community?
I love you, Jason. They call the county commissioners.
How do you plan to deal with the increasing amount of mental trauma being caused by school shootings? And Dr. McDaris, how do you make sure that teachers are mentally healthy for dealing with situations like this?
Well, if you have a lockdown situation, you have a debriefing situation. And we do make, we have services that are available to our employees should they need them. The problem, if you want to identify a problem with our society, is that often it's looked upon as something less if you say that you're having some mental strain. A lot of people will not admit that. They won't talk about it. It's something that we've always kind of kept private. And you have to realize that if a student or a family or a teacher is having some issues where they feel a heightened anxiety or struggling with that, you need to talk to someone. That's where our counselors, our social workers, our administrators, our SROs, it's the whole family. Someone who they can talk to. It takes a number of people. It does take a community to make a school and education function well. And when people are struggling with mental illness, they may not even know that's what it is. I think rather than look upon that as something's wrong with them or something less, I think we're moving to a place, I think it's a better place, where we acknowledge that there are people that have some stressors in their life and they need to talk to someone. And the public, including teachers, among staff members, the public, neighbors, friends, if you know someone's struggling, you may be the person that reaches out and tries to get that person some help. I think that's very important. Every case is unique. Every situation is different. But if you look in the faces of a yearbook at faculty and staff and students, everybody looks fine. They may not be, and someone close to them will know that. And again, I cannot stress how much work that our counselors and our social workers do in our schools. Our psychologists meeting with students and families. Those are critical members of our team.
We have a question about the training for school resource officers. Are you familiar with the National School Shield program, Sheriff Mahoney? And if so, it's a free training program for resource officers and for school administrators. Has the school system or the sheriff's office looked into that before? Is that something you're familiar with?
I'm not familiar with that.
Talking about the security aspects of the facilities that we have, are there things like safety glass in place that help make these doors more secure? And I guess we already talked about cameras being used, but how many schools, can we talk about what it's like to let people into the schools and how they're being vetted before they come in?
Well, what the receptionist who sees that person, the first thing they want to try to establish is if, it's just a single person or it's a group of people, if it's a familiar face. They have an intercom system where they can identify themselves and answer why they're there. Now, is it theoretically possible that someone could say something that's false? Yes, it is, I'll be honest. But we're, at some point, we're just going to try to make the best call we possibly can. One of the things that we confront in our schools sometimes is a situation where a family might be going through a tough time and there might be some disagreement going on between the spouses, for example, and that could be a domestic situation. We work with our SROs to make them aware of that. That can be potentially an argumentative situation, and we try to de-escalate that as much as possible.
Is there a program in place in schools where people can meet regularly to discuss red flags, whether they're troubled students or citizens who might be having trouble, parents that you were just describing, Dr. McDaris? Is there a situation where employees and students are encouraged, or are they afraid to speak up?
Well, I don't know that I can speak for every case. We hope they're encouraged to speak up. Again, that's where our counselors and our school psychologists are very important. They play an important role. And also, we've talked a lot about the SROs, but there are students that will tell the SRO things they will not tell any of the other faculty members. And so I think having those different outlets hopefully will accomplish a component of that. I can't speak for every situation, but certainly I do believe that there is opportunity for people to discuss some concerns that they have. As far as a regular meeting of a large group of people, we don't have that in place. It could be something that we look into. We don't have that in place. I do have to say one thing, and I don't think anybody in here would do it, but it's been on my mind all afternoon because I had someone, I think they were trying to be helpful. They suggested that maybe they were going to test a school's security by trying to get inside the school building, just to make sure that they could expose any flaws in our system. That's a bad idea. Please do not do that. If we become aware of a flaw in our system, we want to address it, but there's better ways to go about that. And it's just been on my mind this afternoon because I know they were trying to be helpful, but that just worries me because we don't need someone doing that for us.
More about prevention. Are there plans in place to fence or gate campuses in different ways than we already have today? Or are there other options for facilities that we're also considering to help make schools less of a fortress, but still safer?
There are, part of it is, there are some things that we're looking into as we look at possible renovations to our schools, regardless of what happens with anything else. Some renovations to make them safer. Today, at Brevard High School, for example, I looked at a prototype that they have that is a metal, it's a metal sheet basically between brick columns that could be used on part of that campus and also could be replicated somewhere else. It's actually, you can see through part of it, it's quite decorative, but it would make it look nicer and not like a fort, but at the same time would inhibit someone being able to get on campus quickly. So we're looking at those types of things.
Again, Dr. McDaris, I got a couple questions that sort of talk around the same thing. If a teacher's first job is to protect children, what's being done with bullying that happens behind the scenes in locker rooms during PE, and for students who are in trouble and are trying to report things, are there social workers in every school? Some school systems have them in every single school. Are there plans to have that in the future for Transylvania County Schools?
We do not currently have a social worker that is assigned at a particular school all day. We do have social workers that move between schools. Bullying, every chance we get, if we encounter bullying, we are asking students to please report that to administration and teachers. Where the frustration can come for parents, I mean, I realize it does, where the frustration can come sometimes is if that parent feels like we didn't do anything. And it may be, depending upon the situation, it may be that we did something and you can't know about it. Because there are FERPA laws, there are individual rights, just as you may not want me to relay some information about your child to some other parent. They have the same rights. We do take it seriously. Can I say that it doesn't happen? Absolutely not. It happens all the time. And we try to work with students to understand why that's just wrong. Bullying of any type is wrong. I don't need any type of descriptor to say, well, you can't bully this person because of this. No, bullying is just wrong. And it makes students not want to be at school. It makes them unhappy. Their grades will suffer. And it really leaves, for many, an impression on their life. You know, I don't want to put Mr. Justice on the spot, but you know, Mr. Justice works with issues related to bullying all the time. I don't know if you have anything you'd like to add.
Just that, you know, our students do work hard, and I'll use my son as an example. He's a teenager, and he has experienced bullying a little last year. And I don't know a good answer to this because, you know, my son I've been part of the school system. I went to school in this system, and he knows that he has resources. We've shared that. He knows that. He loves school. He knows who to go talk to, who to go see about it, etc. But he chose not to. That was just his teenage mind. He didn't want to seem weak. He didn't want to seem doubtful about any decisions he was making as he's trying to grow and be a man, I guess. Eventually it got to a point where he discussed it with me, but when I said, hey, let's go talk to the principal about it, he didn't want to do that. When I mentioned the guidance counselor, no, I don't want to speak to a female. So I don't have a good answer for that. I do know that when we do know about it, we do handle it. There's not many cases. When I was a former assistant principal at Brevard Middle School, when I had a bullying case, I saw it all the way through. I didn't make half decisions or try to side with one or the other or try to make them work it out, because we don't like to put those two people in the same room for negotiations. That doesn't work either. We found that out in the last several years as we've dealt with bullying. But it is something that I'm passionate about because, you know, I've experienced it myself. My son, which I experienced it last year, and it was pretty daunting for us. And the school was very supportive. I did myself go talk to the principal. So I'm there, so I did that anyway. I didn't let him know that. The principal, you know, worked with my son, and teachers worked with my son. I want to say, my son Tim Gorman, Sam Singleton worked with my son and made him feel welcome and knew he had a place to go. And it's worked out since then. Dealt with that issue, we've moved on. He's in 8th grade now, we're having a great year. So we do work very hard in Transylvania County Schools to deal with bullying. I think we do a good job. Our elementary schools have tremendous character education programs, PBIS. Scott Strickland here has a Leader in Me program at his school. You know, we're teaching kids at a very young age about character, and the SROs do a good job of that as well with their DARE programs in 5th and 7th grade. Character goes a long way. I'm also the director of transportation. You know, we got our county commissioners here. I encourage you to ride a school bus, see where these kids live. I know you know the community, but sometimes we don't know the community. And a school bus is a perfect opportunity to see the community. So I think we do a good job. And again, I think being a small community, having smaller schools like we do. I mean, when you're an SRO in Florida and you've got 3,200 students, there's no way you can know all those students. When you're an SRO in a school of 300, you can know all those students. You can say hello to them every day. And I think that goes a long way for both our elementary school as well.
A couple questions just again about how incidents work. If there's an incident at a school here in Rosman, does the school system have an established information area for parents to go to? And when there is a lockdown, who's actually in charge? I think y'all can both speak to that.
Well, we're in charge in the building, but we defer to directions from Sheriff's Department.
So, yeah, absolutely. If it's an active threat, clearly, we're going to take charge of that. The school resource officer is going to run point along with likely our patrol supervisor that's on duty. It's going to be a joint effort. None of this is done just us. It's all in consultation with the administration of the individual school. And so in terms of having a set designated information area, it's really difficult to do that because you don't know to what extent each incident is going to expand or contract. So for example, if we had an incident right here at Rosman High School, you may say, well, it'd be a good idea to set up an information center at Rosman Elementary School. Well, that may not necessarily be the case, because if the incident is large enough, we're likely going to lock down that campus as well as a precaution. And so it makes it really difficult to establish ahead of time a very specific point to have information. One of the things that we're going to do in an actual emergency is establish that point very quickly and use every channel that we have available: social media, website, news stations, school system alerts, everything that we have at our disposal once we set up both an information station as well as a reunification station. I think it's important to get your kid back in your arms just as quickly as we possibly can. And so although there's not a predetermined location for the dissemination of that information, we're going to set that up very quickly and use all of those platforms available to us to get factual information out as quickly as possible.
We have questions, obviously. We've left some kind of big ones. We've had several people ask, what's the
Those weren't
stand?
the big ones.
No. What's the, yes, of course. What's your stance on arming and training teachers in schools? And both of you have been asked that question on different papers.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I've been, for the last couple of weeks, talking to a lot of teachers as I come across them, and I'm asking their opinion. And what I'm finding is there's a pretty overwhelming feeling that they don't want to be armed and to take that responsibility on. I can't sit here and tell you that I would be opposed, just as an individual law enforcement officer, to a teacher that felt comfortable being armed. I can't tell you that I would be opposed to that. What I will tell you is it's an incredibly difficult place to put an educator in. I think it would be incredibly difficult for the teacher that had this kid in biology last semester to now put them in the role of being an enforcer of some sort of discipline this semester. I think that would be incredibly unfair to that educator. With that said, there are some other considerations, and I hope if we start moving in that direction that there are a lot of conversations with a lot of people at the table, because there's a response issue there too. You know, right now, if law enforcement comes into a school building on an active shooter kind of call, we recognize the fact there ought not be anybody in that school building, in the halls and the classrooms, with a gun. And our natural reaction is going to be that would be the bad guy, right? And so I just don't know how you reconcile that with our response. I think, you know, there's been some discussion about identification tags, and honestly, I've got some concerns about who's going to remember to put that on and who's going to. There's just a lot of, that's a much bigger topic than just saying whether we agree or whether we disagree. I think that as a community, we come together and we do every single thing that we think is reasonable to keep our kids safe. What that looks like probably differs a little bit, you know, one community to another. But just to be very fair, I think that would be a very difficult thing to try to pull off in the big picture, to arm our teachers. And again, I love teachers, and I do not want our schools to feel like a prison. I don't think that's good for anybody, and especially it's not good. We've had some questions about the mental impact, and we've talked about how do we debrief the children or handle those mental health issues, de-escalation of that. Well, what do you think we're going to do if we start sending a message that you can't go to the lunchroom, you know, without somebody armed in your classroom? And I've just got some concerns about that.
I welcome the conversation. I'd love to be a part of that. I'd love to be around that table. But at the end of the day, I think that there are some very real issues that need to be discussed in terms of just arming teachers.
Well, I will agree. I'm not in favor of that, I'll be honest with you. And I'm going to tell you why. There are some of you in this room who have been trained for combat. And so it was drilled into you how to react in the heat of a moment to neutralize an opponent. Classroom teacher, some of whom may be combat veterans. The classroom teacher, put yourself in a position that they're in where you have these highly trained law enforcement officers that literally have received hundreds, if not thousands of hours of training in scenarios, and that will continue. And a teacher has not had the benefit of that. In an active shooter situation, I can imagine a hallway that's filled. Sort of like the Florida situation. And there's 4 or 5 students there, and the adrenaline's running. And I cannot tell you what it was like. I've heard uncles talk about it. The closest I could tell you would be an athletic competition where things are happening at 10 times the speed that you think they should be happening. And in a split second, you have to make a decision among those 5 students in the hall, which one's the bad guy and which one's not, and hope you get the right one. I think we need to have a very long, serious conversation before we would do that. It's not that we don't want to protect children, because I can't think of a single teacher that would not jump in front of a student. But in terms of arming them, I think we have to be very careful of what that responsibility entails and the training that they are going to need in order to react accordingly in a situation. You know, I talked to a colleague in another part of the state who had gone through a scenario, and I'm sure it's old hat for some of these folks, but it's a scenario that you even see, quite frankly, you see it on TV where someone's in a situation and different figures pop up. And in a split second, you have to pick the right one. And he commented how difficult that was in the heat of the moment. So I agree with the sheriff. I think we want to have a lot of conversation about what that looks like before we just go ahead and jump into that. And I could be, and I don't think it's appropriate, I could be flippant and say, well, think about some of the teachers that we all had. Would you really want them to have a gun? But it's not really a moment to be flippant about. I mean, that's a serious matter. And I think we've got to make sure that we know exactly what we're doing and that person knows exactly what they're doing. Because you don't get a chance to reset or to think about it for 30 seconds. It might be less than 1 second to make that decision.
Do we have time for a couple more questions on safety matters? Students with special needs are obviously really important to everyone. And are there protocols in place for helping officers and teachers learn how to transport those students in the event of serious problems in the school?
Well, our teachers do know how to address, you're talking about the students that are in wheelchairs, for example.
Any kind of special consideration?
Absolutely. In a lockdown situation, principals know where those students are going to be, where they're supposed to be, how to handle that. That's just part of having drills.
And anything for your school resource officers?
Well, and I'll add to that. That's part of that conversation that happens every single day in all of our schools between the school resource officer and the school administration. You mentioned drills, absolutely. You know, that's the purpose of drills, right? It's not to prove that you know what to do. It's to prove, hey, we need to work on this just a little bit better for the next time. And so I think I think it was 18 drills that we did system-wide last year. 18 drills system-wide. And each one, we try to get just a little bit better each time. And part of that conversation happens every single day, every single drill is, hey, on this drill, we needed to do just a little bit better with that, and that applies to with those populations. So I think that happens every single time we have a discussion about what would we do if, or how are we going to drill, or this drill went really well here, and maybe we need to do a little bit better there. And that's where we want to find out though where we need to do better. We don't want to do that on an actual event. And so I think that conversation happens all the time about, hey, SRO, we got this group down here that might be challenged to get out mobile. They might need a little additional assistance. And that conversation happens between the school resource officer and that school administrator to make sure those needs are addressed.
We had one question about how often the sheriff's office trains with other neighboring counties or other agencies so that in the event of a scenario that gets so large, how are those situations handled?
That's a great question. So we train very regularly with agencies around. We've actually participated in 4 massive events, big training events. One was on the campus of Blue Ridge Community College. Actually 2, one on the Brevard campus, one at Flat Rock. We actually do some drills involving some of our local campuses as well. We always invite those other agencies around. North Carolina law enforcement officers are all trained on the same response. So when we talk about responding to an active shooter, it doesn't matter if you're from Brevard or Manio, you're going to be trained the same way. And so when we call upon mutual aid assistance, and that will happen, I assure you, in the event of any type of event at a school, before we even call, there'll be counties and cities from all over sending people, and everybody is going to be on the same sheet of music. And I can tell you, we've seen that. I can tell you this, but we've absolutely seen that. We have seen that time and time again. That training that we have done with the agencies around us, and that training that happens with all law enforcement officers, have paid off. When we roll in on that same scene and everybody's on the same sheet of music, it's good to know that the training's been the same all the way across. But I've been on some other scenarios that may not have been the case, and you can definitely tell the difference, and it's nice to know.
I just wanted to add about the training. This last year I was very impressed. Was it Henderson County we teamed up with the school buses?
Yes.
Their training not only involves the physical building itself, but every aspect of school. I was very impressed with how our SROs and those officers handle hostage situation on a school bus or situations on a school bus, because that's a confined space. I know the SWAT team has destroyed several of my buses that we no longer have, and in trying to do a good job in keeping kids safe, not just on the campus, but all over, and they work hand in hand with other counties. It was very impressive last year.
I appreciate that, and just so you know, our special response team, that's our local SWAT team through the Sheriff's Office, that's part of what we trained on last month. We set up one of your, maybe, I hope you knew this, we had one of your white buses behind the jail. Okay. And we practiced how to make entry on a bus if we need to, if there was an emergency that was in a bus. And so that's the kind of stuff that we do that you never really know about, is we're constantly looking at things that have happened at other places. We're constantly reading stories about scenarios at other places, and then we develop our training based on what's happened in real world events at other places, so that we can be as most prepared as possible if we were to have something like that occur here. I saw a hand back there, if that's okay, right quick. I think it was on that.
Sure, Mahoney, can I ask, I mean, a majority of everybody that I know that are teachers in Transylvania County are phenomenal, just as you guys are. But beyond hiring any individual coming into the school system, is there a periodic check on these individuals? You're talking about possibly a conversation of arming a teacher. If that teacher ends up being the threat, that obviously is a concern. But is there something for the health and well-being of a teacher periodically beyond just once they're hired, nobody else continues to look into it?
That's a great question. So I can only speak in terms of sheriff's deputy. We do that. We do periodic criminal history checks. If a scenario presents that we feel like there's something occurring within the personal life of a deputy, we can request a fitness for duty evaluation through a mental health professional and get a certified report saying, okay, we believe they're in good shape, or maybe that they need some additional resources. So
We are doing those things in terms of law enforcement. Some of that's required for us to do, and some of it we just go a little bit beyond what's required to do. But we do ongoing checks on our officers.
Of course, on initial hires, we do the criminal background check. It's pretty thorough. We also have a policy in place that if someone has been charged with something, they have a time frame to let us know about that. Most of the time they do, because when we find out about it, which we will from the court system, after the fact, it's a different procedure and discussion for not letting us know. We have also worked with individuals that we become aware of certain times where they're having trouble, and we've offered counseling services, and I've even required those before. As far as ongoing background checks after the initial hire, that currently does not happen. We've talked about that. When we become aware of things that concern us, we will check. But we certainly hope we don't do ongoing. We certainly hope that we catch everything. I hope that we do. But that's a good, fair question.
I know we're getting close to the end, but we're starting to see some other questions come up. And if your question wasn't answered, please be aware, we're going to take these, and I'm going to type up answers as the public information officer. This is really important to us. We're going to type up answers to these questions and make them available on the Transylvania County Schools website. So we'll provide links to help you get to that. So if you don't feel your answer was thorough enough, we'll make sure that it is by the time it's typed up. We have a question over on this side of the room.
First of all, thank you so much for having this forum for all of us to get together and talk and share ideas and answer questions, ask questions. I just have a really quick question. My son's in Brevard Middle, and I don't know if any plans have been made for a town hall for the students to get their input, to get their experience, their opinion, what they're feeling, what they're going through, kind of give them a place to get together and talk as well, because this directly involves all of them, and they might have a different perspective that, as adult parents, we don't see. Is there anything in place for
Have not planned anything yet. You're the first person that suggested that to me. That's a great idea. There's not many plans yet. Somewhat related to that, just an awareness piece, and many of you may know this, somewhat related to that. Many of you may know this, some of you may not. Shortly after the incident in Florida, there began to circulate on the internet and through Facebook contacts and other social media for students to participate in a nationwide walkout. And the date for that is supposed to be Wednesday of this week. We anticipate that some of the students at our high schools will want to do that. It is moved in a direction where, rather than it being a political statement for one point of view versus another, it's moved more toward simply as a way for students to honor the 17 victims. Now, with that in mind, we do want to have school security, and we realize some students will want to exercise their First Amendment rights, but we can't really comfortably allow students to just go anywhere. So there is a designated area that if students want to do this, it's supposed to last 17 minutes, there will be a place they can go, because obviously, just to tell you what we think about, I wish we didn't have to, if somebody's wanting to do something bad, that's the day they would pick to do it, because they know students would be outside, so we don't want them outside. We want them to go to a place where we have faculty and staff that can make sure they're safe, they can honor those individuals, and they can, it's not exactly the meeting to talk about. Students who do not want to participate don't have to do that. Those teachers there'll be teachers in the classrooms. But it has gained such a momentum that we realized that in talking to some students, they just felt like they wanted to do something to honor the 17 victims. So we're trying to make it a non-political thing, just simply allowing them to exhibit that respect, and it will last approximately 17 minutes. I don't know how many, I do not know how many students will participate. We don't know. They're not required to. This is a homegrown thing that started up on social media, but we anticipate some will want to do that, and so we're preparing for that just in case. It's not exactly what you were asking, but it's kind of, maybe think about that.
I have a few questions. I have a son that goes to Brevard High School. He will be a senior next year, and he plays football. Mark has coached him for several years now. One of my questions is that in light of the recent events regarding school security, has it been considered about hiring or asking for volunteers from the veterans who, and we know that there are numerous veterans in our area alone, to help provide additional security in case of an active shooter event or any active event on our school campuses. And I will let you guys answer that. And I have a couple of other questions also.
I've been approached by some veterans that have suggested that. Part of this would be, is that veteran, just as we try to make sure we have the right fit for our SRO, it would be the same type of conversation if it got to that point. You want someone that interacts very well with children, students, someone that interacts very well with teachers and staff, because as you all know, working with teenagers is very different than working with adults. And so that would be an important part of the discussion as to what that looked like. And I would want that level of interaction with someone else on campus, because then you don't want, you move to where you're creating a position where they trust that person like our SROs, and there's not a sense of fear or a sense of an armed camp. We don't want that. There's also the issue, I would think, and I will defer to the sheriff on this, they're under the SROs, there may be an issue of liability there on the training, and I don't know, so I'm going to defer to him on that part.
So I completely support our veterans. Thank you to every veteran in here for your service. There are some other conversations that need to happen about that. To start with, there's some North Carolina laws that would prevent certain classes of folks, other than law enforcement, from having firearms on school campus. That's a good law. It's not a bad thing. So I think that's part of the discussion. You got to talk about that. The other part of that is there's a very distinct difference between military training and civilian law enforcement training, and I think you really would have to address that. There's a completely different rules you play by, and so I think, I'm certainly not opposed to using that. I think we try to hire veterans every chance I get. Some of the best employees I ever have, but there are some very distinct differences that we would need to reconcile before we just started putting veterans in there to provide a security function.
My other question is that in light of the recent events, in our country and at our high school, has there been any kind of funding set aside to put additional cameras in our parking lots, or entrances or exits or anything like that?
The answer is yes. We're trying to expand our camera coverage, make sure there's not some spots in the parking lot, for example, that are not spotted. There is the issue of resource allocation. Safety is foremost. We have a lot of different things that are going on, and the cameras, there is a cost, but it's not just the cost of the camera, it's also the cost of expanding, using the software for the additional bandwidth that you're involved with. So that is an ongoing conversation. Actually, this week we're looking at locating another camera at a location at Brevard Middle School. It's a slow process, probably in our eyes right now, because we'd like to have them everywhere. But that is an ongoing conversation to try to expand that.
We're gonna, it's okay, in the interest of time, we've had a lot of folks send questions in, and like I said, we're gonna make sure these answers are all available to everyone. Probably have time for one more question, then we can start letting people make their way, unless you are so diehard that you want to stay all night.
I just have one question for Superintendent.
Yes, ma'am?
If the students at Brevard High are planning to have a walkout, isn't that something that would be better served on their own time to organize as opposed to disrupting the school day?
It
No,
would be
I mean, the reason I'm saying this is because they're children and the school has policy and you're there for the day. And then what if there's another situation, another one, we want to honor this, honor that? Yes, I respect that they have rights to their feelings, but that should be done on private time as opposed to being allowed to be done during school hours. What are your feelings on that?
Well, it would be my preference that that would occur. I don't think that will occur. And just as, actually, with all due respect, just as you feel very strongly about that, I've talked to a number this week that feel very strongly the other way. And there is, I find, I'm not passing above, but I find it's very difficult to come to a ground where everyone's happy. But I do know that I don't know how many may participate. Maybe one, maybe none. I don't know. But we're going to anticipate that, because what we did not want to happen was we're all of a sudden in the middle of class and just all of a sudden students get up, some for no reason, to walk out, and we don't know why, and we're trying to chase those students down, but meanwhile we have other students over here. And I know that one answer could be, well, we'll just punish them for doing that. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. Because what happens is then we have utter chaos, and we're trying to get these students to understand some of their civic responsibility, but to focus it in the right manner. I do not know how many will participate, ma'am, but I think it is our responsibility to at least anticipate the possibility of some and direct them to a location so that they will do what they feel they need to do, but at the same time, we don't leave the rest of the school unsupervised. That's probably not the perfect answer, but that's sort of where we are today. Thank you for your question.
So I just want to say thank you.
Push the button all the time.
Time up. We've killed this. I just want to say thank you to everybody for spending your evening with us. This is something I hope if you don't take anything else away from the night, you understand that we take the safety of your children very, very seriously. And we want to do the very best job we can every single day to make sure that we run the safest schools in all of America. Can we prevent every single thing from happening? I wish we could, but the simple answer is not. What we can do is create the partnerships that we need to make sure we have the resources in place to make them the very safest campuses that we can humanly do. And that's what I'm so proud that we are doing. And I want to publicly say thank you to each and every one of these SROs. You guys are heroes to me. Thank you to all of you. I encourage you to talk to your kids, have good conversations, have tough conversations. Get back around that dinner table and let's talk about some tough things and find tough solutions.